Break the silence, end the violence. You're watching Voices of Victory, a TV program designed to raise awareness on domestic violence. I'm your host, and my name is Danette Mahabeer-Turner, a domestic violence survivor, advocate, and published author of the book Leave Alive, subtitled Goodbye Domestic Violence. And today, I'm wearing the color purple. And purple is a symbol of peace, courage, survival, and honor to domestic violence awareness. And today, my very special guest is none other than Aimee Clymer-Hancock, the first Assistant Commonwealth Attorney in McCracken County. She is the creator and lead prosecutor of the Vulnerable Victim Unit of Special Prosecution, focusing on domestic violence, sexual assault, and child abuse. Aimee, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, and we're going to jump right into it. You've built a career dedicated to protecting vulnerable victims. What inspired you to focus your work on cases like domestic violence, child abuse, and sexual assault?
So most importantly, in the Vulnerable Victim Unit, we focus on crimes that occur in dynamic interpersonal relationships. So typically we're seeing in the arena of domestic violence, victims and perpetrators who do have that relationship of love or connection, which makes accountability the hardest. Mm-hmm. If you or I were walking down the street and we were assaulted by an unknown assailant, we wouldn't be questioned about our motives to seek justice. We wouldn't have a hard time holding that individual accountable based on the fact that we don't have that interpersonal connection. So victims of domestic violence have incredible barriers to holding offenders accountable and to seeking justice due to that existing relationship. So the vulnerability that we experience in those cases is based on that connection. And when I began prosecuting domestic violence way back in 2009 in Lexington, Kentucky, I recognized that we have to approach these cases very uniquely. We have to always be respectful of the feelings that our victims may have for their perpetrator. And I routinely approach victims from a place of, you got to set aside your judgment. Mm-hmm. Everyone comes to their own experience from their perspective. And it is not my job to talk to a victim about why he or she should feel differently about their perpetrator. It's my job to help them understand what resources the criminal justice system has to ensure their safety and to hold their offender accountable. So realizing early on in my career that people who experience these crimes, whether it is domestic violence or child abuse, sexual assault, realizing the special needs that those victims have for compassion, empathy, and understanding, that is what motivated me to create a specialized unit, because we have got to meet people where they are.
I love that. I love that. Thank you so much. And so as the creator of the Vulnerable Victim Unit, what gap did you really see in the justice system that made you feel that this unit was necessary?
Really, it's that empathy. The criminal justice system has not historically been a hospitable place for victims. There are, and should be, rights and focus and interest on defendants. Defendants have constitutional rights. Mm-hmm. And my job as a prosecutor is to ensure those rights. In fact, it is to not just give defendants a trial, but to give them a fair trial. And that is a primary responsibility of my role. But in that same vein, I have legal and ethical responsibilities to victims. And both of those rights and responsibilities can exist at the same time. But it requires prosecutors to set aside the judgment again, to meet people where they are, and to listen. When victims of domestic violence come to me, and we know that domestic violence happens and can happen in any relationship.
Absolutely.
But statistically speaking, we know it is typically male perpetrators and female victims. So it is not uncommon for a victim to come to me and say, these things happened. What your case file states, Aimee, that happened. But I love him. And I respond by saying, you can love him and I can hold him accountable. And both of those things can happen at the same time. So the missing link or the gap in the system that I observed was empathy. And realizing that when these victims find themselves in the middle of the criminal justice system, it's often because they called 911 in a moment of life-threatening events. They had no other choice. They made that call. And we as prosecutors should expect that after that life-threatening event, after victims are safe and offenders are hopefully elsewhere, feelings may change. And we should know, based on our training, education, and experience, to expect a victim to not necessarily change his or her mind, but to feel differently about what they want to achieve. And I should be ready to receive that. And it shouldn't be from a place of judgment of, if that perpetrator assaulted you, then you should want him or her in prison. We should receive however that victim is experiencing their life in that moment and help them understand what my responsibility as the prosecutor is. So it was a lack of empathy, it was a lack of patience, it was a lack of understanding. And when we reinvigorate conversations from that arena, I think the criminal justice system becomes less intimidating. It becomes more reassuring. And it is the way to ensure that people reach out when they need help, because that is what it's all about.
I love that. Thank you so much. It is time for the safety tip of the day, brought to you by Paducah Police Department, our very own community engagement officer, Blake Quinn.
Hey guys, it's Officer Quinn with the Paducah Police Department, bringing you the safety tip of the day. Building your financial safety net. Managing money in a controlled environment can be challenging, but taking steps toward financial independence is crucial. Here's what to consider. Start small. Even if it's just a few dollars every week, begin setting aside any amount you can. The key is consistency and discretion, ensuring that the abuser remains unaware. Trustworthy keepers. Find a trusted friend or family member to safeguard this money. This not only hides it from the abuser, but also means it's available to you in times of need. Seek employment assistance. If you're without a personal income, explore programs specifically designed to help victims of abuse find work and regain their financial independence. Prepare ahead. Use your free moments to either create or update your resume. Being ready can make all the difference when an opportunity knocks. Taking control of your financial future is empowering and essential for your safety and well-being. And that's today's safety tip from the Paducah Police Department.
That was the safety tip of the day, brought to you by the Paducah Police Department, our very own community engagement officer, Blake Quinn. Aimee, welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
We're going to jump right into it. Many survivors hesitate to come forward because they fear the legal process. Can you walk us through what happens when a domestic violence case comes to your office?
Certainly. So I am in the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office. So we prosecute felony cases. And so by the time any domestic violence case has made its way to my office, there have been several other legal proceedings prior to reaching circuit court, which is where I practice. So for the purposes of what they would specifically encounter in my office, my policy and the policy of the McCracken Commonwealth Attorney's Office is to try to make contact with victims as early as possible in the process. And we do that because we're dealing with human beings in very complex scenarios, very scary scenarios, and they need to have the reassurance of knowing that their voice matters. So victims should be experiencing phone calls from our office, from my victim advocate. Her name is Sarah. She is an exceptional human who reaches out by phone, by secure text, by mail, any way that we can make contact with victims to reassure them that there is someone who cares about how they feel.
I love that.
About what has happened. That is critical, as we spoke previously, because feelings do change. Mm-hmm. And that's okay. And it does not mean that a victim is uncooperative or untruthful or any of the things that we sometimes hear, any of the stereotypes that we can hear communicated. That doesn't mean that that is real or true. And so making contact early gives victims someone to communicate with, allows them to say, these are my immediate needs. Because we know victims of domestic violence have broad needs. They may be out of a home. They may have fled a home due to the physical violence. And so as the prosecutor's office, we have obligations, but we also have ethical rules that prohibit us from meeting all of the needs that we know exist. So when we see those needs, housing, counseling, we can make connections for victims through community partners. And boy, McCracken County has every tool in the arsenal for success. We have got it all.
That is amazing.
And as someone who has prosecuted in multiple jurisdictions, I am so grateful for the community that McCracken County has. We have it all through social workers, if we have children involved in these domestic violence situations, dedicated law enforcement. We have the finest, and they know how to investigate these cases. They know how to bring me an evidence-based case, which I can prosecute if feelings change from our victim. We have resources in our community, the Merriman House, extraordinary, dedicated advocates, not just victim advocates, but legal advocates that can step into the gap with victims as they're making life-changing decisions about how to move forward from offenders. What steps do we need to take in terms of protective orders? The Merriman House is right there with individuals. And the best part about our community resources, they exist whether or not a case proceeds through the criminal justice system. No victim, and in fact, if I could share one fact with any victim of violence who may be listening today, there is help and there are resources, and those exist whether or not you choose to prosecute your case. And that needs to be known and understood.
I love that. I love that. Now you talk about, the different things that people are, like we talk about the misconceptions a little bit, but I want you to just talk about some of the most common misconceptions the public may have about prosecuting domestic violence cases.
I think the most common misunderstanding and misconception is that if someone were physically assaulted, they would leave It would be as simple as that. It would be a punch to the face and they're gone. And that is such an oversimplification of an extraordinarily complex cycle of violence, because domestic violence is a cycle of violence.
It is.
And there are moments of where that violence peaks. It can become physical. And as that cycle is progressing, there is a phase often referred to as the honeymoon phase. And it is after the violence where promises are made and guarantees are made and assurances are made where this will never happen again. You know, hey, I lost my cool. I had too much to drink. All the excuses come out in that phase, and all the promises are made. And for two people who have that interpersonal connection, that love one another, that maybe have built a life together, you want to believe those things as real and true. And so that misconception that a victim should just leave is such a privileged position to take when we don't know the life that these individuals are leaving. They may not have the support system to call a friend, call a family member, and make a change in that moment. So again, we began our conversation with me saying, you've got to set aside judgment. And I'm talking about the prosecutors. Got to set aside the judgment and the feelings that you may have about choices made in cases, and just focus on the facts. What happened to that victim? What can I prove as the prosecutor in a court of law? And what does the law say about what happened here? So I would urge the community to think, would we judge a victim so harshly? Again, our scenario, if you or I were walking down the street and we were assaulted tomorrow by a stranger, how would the community react to that? Don't look at domestic violence differently. Look at the facts. Look at the evidence. That is what my job is. Apply the law and seek justice on behalf of victims.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. It is time for our highlighted segment called Making Empowered Choices, brought to you by Janie Wells, psychology instructor at WKCTC.
Hi, my name is Janie Wells. I'm a licensed professional clinical counselor and assistant professor of psychology at West Kentucky Community and Technical College. The tips I'm sharing today come from Why Does He Do That by Lundy Bancroft. Another book I recommend by him is Should I Stay or Should I Go? Abusers consciously manipulate and control, but the underlying thinking that drives the behavior is not as conscious. Here are some warning flags that could indicate abuse might occur. Speaks disrespectfully about former partners. Disrespect toward you. He does favors for you that you don't want or puts on a show of generosity. He's controlling. He is possessive. Nothing is ever his fault. He is self-centered. He abuses drugs or alcohol and pressures you to participate in substance use with him. He pressures you for sex. He gets serious too quickly about the relationship. He intimidates you when he's angry, gets close to you when angry, puts a finger in your face, pushes you, restrains you, or blocks your way, tells you he is trying to make you listen, tries to make you flinch or feel afraid, makes vague threats, drives recklessly or speeds up when angry, punches walls or kicks doors. If he has double standards, if he has stereotype beliefs about sex roles, if he appears to be attracted to vulnerability. Some abusers date younger women or women who've been through a recent traumatic experience for this reason. He retaliates against you for complaining about his behavior. He tells you that your objections to his mistreatment are your own problem. He blames you for the impact of his behavior. If he undermines your progress in your life, if he denies what he did, he says you made him do it. He touches you in anger or puts you in fear. If he coerces you into having sex or sexually assaults you, his controlling, disrespect, or degrading behavior is a pattern.
That was our highlighted segment called Making Empowered Choices, brought to you by Janie Wells, psychology instructor at WKCTC. Welcome back to the show, Aimee.
Thank you.
Domestic violence cases often involve victims who may feel pressured to drop charges, and we talked a little bit about that with their feelings changing, right? How does your team address these challenges while still seeking justice?
Sure. So when I meet with victims, whether it is a child victim or an adult, I typically show them one of the important papers from the file, and I show them the name of the case. And the case is not victim versus defendant. The case is the Commonwealth of Kentucky versus the defendant. Because although there certainly is a victim in the case, this crime is being addressed by the government because it was an offense committed against the peace and dignity of the Commonwealth. So we as prosecutors have to send a very clear message that the violence that is happening in homes, the violence that's happening behind closed doors, it is an offense against all of us. And we have to hold the line and say it is the Commonwealth of Kentucky that is prosecuting this case. So if and when offenders try to intimidate or retaliate, harass victims in an attempt to make them drop charges, it's our job to make a very clear stand and send a very clear message that we are not intimidated. We cannot be harassed, coerced, or confused. We focus on the facts, not the feelings. If you try to intimidate that victim, there are felony offenses in place to respond to that behavior, in and of itself different than what I am prosecuting in the underlying DV case. You cannot intimidate the Commonwealth of Kentucky. And even when victims come to prosecutors and they say, please drop these charges, my response is one of non-judgment, one of empathy, one of understanding, but at the same time, I make it very clear, you cannot drop the charges because the charges are not yours to drop. They belong to me, and we move forward based on an evidence-based prosecution.
I love that. I love that. So what role does evidence play when a victim is too afraid to testify?
Yes. So in those circumstances when victims make it clear that they cannot, or sometimes express that they will not, these are hard conversations.
Absolutely.
They don't believe that they can move forward. I try to explain that process. I try to explain the safety that is that courtroom. There is no safer place than the McCracken County courtroom in which we prosecute these cases. So we highlight how I will keep them safe in that room, but then we also highlight all of the things that I will be talking about, the evidence that is independent of that victim. And it's my job as the prosecutor to bring that information forth. There have been instances where I have had to prosecute a case when victims have, many times, begged me not to. I have put a victim on the stand, and because she needed me to, I said, do you want to be here today? And she said her truth, which is all I ever ask of anyone. And the truth is, no, she did not. Did I compel you here today? Yes, you did. Do you still love him? Yes, I do. All I ask is the truth. And if that is the truth, I welcome that in the courtroom, because what we do, what a prosecutor does when they do that, is they send a message to the offender, it's me that's prosecuting this case. You want to blame someone? Blame me. And that reassures my victim that I've got you. And it tells the offender that something much bigger, larger, and stronger, the Commonwealth of Kentucky, is standing behind this pursuit of justice.
Thank you so much. And for those who are watching today who may be living with abuse right now, what is your message to them?
That there is help, and there is non-judgment, and there is empathy and understanding at every corner of this process. And whether or not you ever find your way to my office, There is help in the community, so reach out. If there is an emergency, do not hesitate to call 911. But if you need steps to plan a safe exit, reach out to the Merriman House. There is a response that is appropriate for whatever phase or stage you are in. Make that call, because you are deserving of a life of peace and dignity and respect.
I love that. Aimee, thank you so much for joining me today, for being here and taking the time out of your busy schedule to interview with me today.
Thank you for having
you.
me. Yes, ma'am.
That was the end of another awesome episode. And before we wrap up, I want to share the National Domestic Violence Hotline with you. Call 1-800-799-SAFE. That's 1-800-799-7233, or text the word BEGIN to 88788. That's 88788. Remember, your voice matters, your life matters, and you deserve to be safe and loved. You are not alone, and you are fearfully and wonderfully made. I've been your host. My name is Danette Mahabeer-Turner. I will see you on the next episode.